Note 6.5d, the quadratic formula. Let's recall that we have the standard form equation ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So you want to make sure that the equation is set equal to 0. If it's set equal to anything else, everything else needs to move to the left side of the equation, and only 0 should be on the right side. You want to divide each term by the greatest common factor if possible, and then you would identify a, b, and c. Plug it into the quadratic formula. Simplify the square root, the discriminant inside of the square root. You'll simplify that part, simplify the whole fraction, and then you'll list your two answers. So, if we graph these functions, we have three different types of solutions. So this one has two unique real. So we'll just put two real. This one has one repeated real. And then this one has 0 real, which would be two imaginary. And then if you see something that looks like this is actually a cubic, but it's 3 repeated reals. And we'll see more cubic functions in the upcoming units this year. Let's look at example 1, reduce. You will reduce these fractions. So the first thing you want to do is simplify the square root. The square root of 10 cannot be simplified, so we're done with that step, and now we're going to simplify the fraction. To simplify the fraction, we're going to put a heart around these three numbers. And we want to find the greatest common factor of those three numbers, 4, 2, and 6. They're all even numbers, and the GCF is 2. So we could divide each of these three numbers by 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. And 6 divided by 2 is 3. So we have 2 plus or minus the square root of 10 all over 3. This would be your simplified fraction. Let's do B. 12 plus or minus the square root of 32 all over 4. This square root can be simplified. The square root of 32 is the same thing as 4 times 8. 8 is the same thing as 4 times 2. So we have the square root of 4 times the square root of 4 times the square root of 2. That's 2 times 2 times square root of 2. That's 4 square root of 2. So we're going to write this out again. So we have 12 plus or minus 4 times the square root of 2 all over 4. Okay, from here, we're going to draw our heart. And we're going to find the greatest common factor of those three numbers. The GCF of 12, 4, and 4. They're all even numbers, so we can at least take out a 2. But we can also take out a 4. So the greatest common factor of these three numbers is 4. So we're going to divide each of these three numbers by 4. 12 divided by 4 is 3. 4 divided by 4 is 1. And 4 divided by 4 is 1. So your simplified fraction is 3 plus or minus the square root of 2. We don't have to write those ones there. And that's it. Let's look at example 1C. 9 plus or minus 12 times the square root of negative 4 all over 3. The square root of negative 4 can be reduced. It's the same thing as the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 4. The square root of negative 1 is I. The square root of 4 is 2. So we have 2i right here. So then we have 9 plus or minus 12 times 2i all over 3. That's 9 plus or minus 24i all over 3. Now we want to find the greatest common factor of our three numbers. 9, 24, and 3. They all could divide by 3, and the GCF is 3. So 9 divided by 3 is 3. 24i divided by 3 is 8i. And 3 divided by 3 is 1. So we don't have to write that again. This is our simplified expression. 3 plus or minus 8i. D. 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 48 all over 6. Negative 48 can be reduced. The square root of negative 48 is the same thing as negative 1 times 4 times 12. 12 is the same thing as 4 times 3. So we have the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 4 times the square root of 4 times the square root of 3. The square root of negative 1 is I, the square root of 4 is 2, the square root of this 4 is 2, and the square root of 3 is just the square root of 3. So we have 4i square root 3. So we'll rewrite our fraction. We have 6 plus or minus 4i square root 3 all over 6. From here we want to find the greatest common factor of these three numbers. So the GCF of 6, 4, and 6 would be 2. They're all even numbers. So 6 divided by 2 is 3. 4 divided by 2 is 2, so we have 2i square root 3. And then 6 divided by 2 is 3. So this is our simplified expression. 3 plus or minus 2i square root 3 all over 3. Example 2. Find the roots of each function below using the quadratic formula. There's no greatest common factor on A, 9x squared minus 6x plus 11 equals 0. And it's also set equal to 0 already. So we could go ahead and identify A, B, and C. So A is 9, B is negative 6, C is 11. We'll plug them into the formula. X equals negative B plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. And we'll plug those in. B was negative 6, and a was 9, and c is 11. From here, we're going to simplify a bit. Negative times negative is a positive, so we have 6 plus or minus negative 6 times negative 6 is positive 36. 9 times 11 is 99. 99 times 4 is 396. All over 18. So if we subtract these two, we get negative 360. So if 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 360 all over 18. From there, we can simplify the square root of negative 360. It has a negative, so we can pull out negative 1. We can also pull out negative 4, or we can pull out a 4. That'd be 4 times 90. And 90 is 9 times 10. So we have the square root of -1 times the square root of 4 times the square root of 9 times the square root of 10. So it'd be I times 2 times 3 times square root 10. So it'd be 6I square root 10. We'll rewrite our fraction to have 6 plus or minus 6I square root 10 all over 18. We'll draw our heart. The greatest common factor of 6, 6, and 18 is 6. So we're going to divide each of these three numbers by 6. So 6 divided by 6 is 1. 6 divided by 6 is 1. And then 18 divided by 6 is 3. So we have 1 plus or minus 1I times the square root of 10 all over 3. So those are your two solutions. We have 1 plus or minus I square root 10 all over 3. Those are your two solutions. B, x squared minus 3x plus 5 equals 0. So the equation equals 0, and the greatest common factor is 1. So we'll just go ahead and go on to the next step. Identify A, B, and C. A is 1, B is -3, and C is 5. From here, we'll plug it into the quadratic formula. So we have -3 plus or minus the square root of parentheses -3 close parentheses squared minus 4 times 1 times 5 all over 2 times 1. From there, we're going to want to simplify it. Negative times -3 is a positive 3. -3 times -3 is a positive 9. And then -4 times 1 is -4. -4 times 5 is a -20. 2 times 1 is 2. Okay, let's subtract 9 minus 20. We get 3 plus or minus the square root of -11 all over 2. Now, the square root of -11 is the square root of -1 times the square root of 11. So we have I square root of 11. So then we have our answers. You have 3 plus or minus I square root of 11 all over 2. The GCF of 3, 1, and 2 is just 1, so that's why there's nothing you can simplify here. C, x squared minus 3x plus 1 equals 0. The equation equals 0, the GCF equals 1, so we're ready to identify A, B, and C. A is 1, B is -3, C is 1. We're going to plug it into the quadratic formula. So we have x equals -3 plus or minus the square root of parentheses -3 close parentheses squared minus 4 times 1 times 1 all over 2 times 1. Let's simplify this. Negative times negative is a positive, so we have 3 plus or minus the square root of 9 minus 4 all over 2. 9 minus 4 is 5. The square root of 5 is already simplified. So then we have 3 plus or minus the square root of 5 all over 2. If we drew our heart, the GCF of 3, 1, and 2 is just 1, so we're done simplifying. So our answers are x equals 3 plus or minus the square root of 5 all over 2. Those are your two solutions. Let's look at this last example. D. Negative 2x squared plus 5x plus 3 equals 0. It equals 0, and the greatest common factor is not negative 2, it's just 1 again. So identify A, B, and C, and then plug into the quadratic formula. A is negative 2, B is 5, and C is 3. So when we plug it into the quadratic formula, we'll get negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 5 squared minus 4 times negative 2 times 3 all over 2 times negative 2. From there, we're going to simplify this. Negative times 5 is just negative 5. So we have negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 25 plus negative 4 times negative 2 is a positive 8. 8 times 3 is 24. All over negative 4. 25 plus 24 is 49. So then we have negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 49 all over negative 4. The square root of 49 is a perfect square. It equals 7. So then we have negative 5 plus or minus 7 all over negative 4. We'll write those out as two separate expressions. Negative 5 minus 7 over negative 4, and negative 5 plus 7 over negative 4. So negative 5 plus negative 7 is negative 12, and then that would give you a positive 3. 7 minus 5 is 2. 2 over negative 4 is negative 1/2. So your two solutions are x equals negative 1/2 and x equals 3.